Hey y'all, so I thought I'd take a minute to show you a video of how I stretch my watercolor paper with the system that I created. So real quickly, we'll go over the parts. The system uses a MSB board that has white coating on one side and black on the other, which is really a whiteboard that you can buy at Lowe's. And I cut them down to the sizes I need for each one. And with that, I also have aluminum channels that I use that I have cut down to equal the 4 sides on each of these stretching boards that I have. And then I use this red carpet tape that's also waterproof around the outer edges. So what we do to stretch the paper on here is just like in all watercolor stretching situations, you have a large tub. In my case, it's the bathtub, and I lower the paper into lukewarm water and let it sit for about 5 minutes or so. Not too long. You want it to sit long enough to completely saturate the paper, but you don't want to let it sit a whole lot longer than that, but you want to make sure it's thoroughly wet. So once the paper is wet, I pull it out of the bathtub and then kind of drip it as much as I can, not dry, but I just get the extra water off of it. And then I carry it over to the counter where I have my board waiting for it, laying on a towel. And then I lay the board centered as best I can over the stretcher board, which I have cut to 18 by 24 inches. And at that point, you want to make sure that you have the front of the paper facing out, obviously. Not that I think it matters a whole lot with Arches paper, but I like to do that as good practice. You can look at the watermark in the Arches paper and you'll see whether it's reading forward or backward. So I put my paper on with the watermark reading forward so I know I'm painting on the front of the paper. And at that point, I will use a sponge to rub the paper down to a wet sponge. Not sopping wet, but a wet sponge just to smooth the paper down, get the air bubbles out and everything like that. And then before I start the stretching process and putting the channels on, what I like to do is go around to all 4 corners and cut off the extra paper at a 45-degree angle on all 4 corners so that when I fold it inward toward the back, the paper doesn't overlap. And that helps a lot with helping things to fit into the stretcher. So once I've gone around all 4 corners and cut the 45-degree angle corners off, I'm ready to begin stretching the actual paper. So what I'll do is I'll take the first long edge at that point and I bring the board up toward me to where I can get my fingers around the back side with the lower part of the board holding the paper down on the towel underneath while I pull and stretch the paper on top, while I take the long channel and I work the channel onto the edge of the paper all the way from one end of the board to the other, making sure that the paper is even and taut all the way from the left to the right as I get that channel completely on. Once that channel's on, then I can turn the board over and flip it the other way and then begin to pull the paper in the opposite direction so that I'm working on the opposite long side of the board. And I'll take my channel, my other channel, and do the same process again, pulling down on the back of the paper while putting the channel in all the way along both to the other side until I have both the left and the right sides of the board fully clamped at that point. At that point, then I can turn the board 90 degrees and begin doing the same process on the shorter sides by turning it and pulling the paper constantly to keep it very tight. So by the time I've done all 4 sides, I will check and make sure that I've got all the crimps and bubbles out the best I can. I will occasionally pull one off and correct it if I have to, but I try not to. When that's done, that's pretty much it at that point. I usually let it dry overnight. You can use a hairdryer, and I do use a hairdryer sometimes just because I want to check a few things, but I still won't paint on it usually for at least 12 to 24 hours because I want the paper to be fully dry before I get started. Because as you've also seen, I tape my perimeters out on my paper. So whatever size my image is going to be, I do a tape off at that point. And I want my paper to dry when I'm putting that tape on so that the tape stays on. And then you're good to go at that point. You finish your painting, remove the tape, pull the clamps off the side of the board, trim the paper, and you're ready to frame. Well, that's it for now. I hope this video was helpful, and remember, always paint the hands. Cheers.